and welcome to Cryptid by State, Montana. With today's video, it marks the 34th state that we have visited in this series. This means that we only have 16 more videos remaining. Things really heated up in the voting over the past few weeks, in which I wasn't quite sure what state would be next. For a while, it was a neck-and-neck race between Montana, Kansas, and Minnesota, but eventually today's state prevailed with just 3 more votes. Anyway, we have quite a few interesting cryptids to talk about in today's video. So, join me once again on our cryptid family road trip as we travel from our previous location of Alabama and head slightly northwest to our current destination of Montana. Montana actually has quite a fairly short history, at least for what we normally talk about. It is somewhat debated as to how long people have lived on the land, but it is generally said to be between 7,000 and 12,000 years ago. For quite some time, 7,000 years was the standard, but in 1968, remains of an infant known as the Clovis child was found in western Montana, and they were dated to 12,600 years old. As with most states, the original inhabitants were Native Americans from various tribes, including the Crow, Blackfoot, Cheyenne, and Salish. For the most part, non-native people didn't venture into the land until around the 17th century, when French and Spanish fur traders ventured there. After this, the United States acquired the area from the French with the Louisiana Purchase. Prior to this, the U.S. considered the area too unknown and distant to explore. Lewis and Clark's expedition first explored the area in 1804, and this was soon followed up by fur trappers as well as Roman Catholic missionaries. These latter people established the first settlement in 1841 called the St. Mary's Mission. The American Fur Trading Company then built Fort Benton along the Missouri River in 1846. In 1858, gold was discovered, and this brought many people out to establish claims. With this influx of European settlers, the native tribes started to feel the pressure from the U.S. government. In 1861, most of Montana was designated as part of the Dakota Territory, with a small portion also belonging to the Washington Territory. Then in 1863, it became part of the Idaho Territory, and finally, in 1864, it was officially called the Montana Territory. As stated prior to that section, the native tribes were facing tribulations from the government, but in the 1870s, they combined forces and fought back. These battles even included the famous Battle of Little Bighorn, also known as Custer's Last Stand. On November 8, 1889, Montana became the 41st state to join the Union. When it comes to Montana's flag, it is very reminiscent of quite a few other states that we have already visited. It is quite simply the state seal on a background of blue. Originally, this flag was utilized during the Spanish-American War, but it wasn't recognized as the official flag until 1904. It was revised on July 1, 1981, with the name Montana being included. The seal itself consists of many symbols. The sunrise, snowy mountains, great falls of the Missouri River, trees, and hills all indicate the area's natural beauty. A shovel, plow, and pick are in the foreground to indicate the state's mining and farming industry. Below this is a ribbon with the state's motto of Oro y Plata, which means gold and silver, and indicates the importance of those minerals to the state's economy. Okay, so what cryptids does this area have? This state has sightings of cryptids that encompass most all spectrums of the paranormal world. This includes ones found in the air, land, water, and possibly even underground. I tend to talk about water-based ones first, so let's not break with tradition and start there. In Flathead County, just south of the city of Kalispell, is the aptly named Flathead Lake. While we are talking about cryptids, I feel it would be interesting to note that this is the same lake that many photographs have emerged showing just how crystal clear the water is, as long as you're close to the shore. While it is somewhat of a natural formation, the lake itself was created in 1930 when the Kerr Dam was built on the Flathead River. Although this construction only raised the water level 10 feet, and it is 370 feet at its deepest. Anyway, this body of water is also home to the legendary beast known as the Flathead Monster, or Flessie. Stories of this creature have been around for hundreds of years, with over 109 sightings to date. It is described as being 20 to 40 feet long, having bluish skin and black eyes. What varies is how the body looks, with some saying it is a serpent, well-shaped, or even like a plesiosaur. The first known report actually came by way of legend of the Kootenai people. They state that originally the tribe lived on an island in the middle of the lake. One day, two girls saw what appeared to be 2-foot-long antlers protruding from the ice-covered lake. They ran out and tried to recover them, but suddenly the ice began to crack and a giant serpent head emerged. The girls managed to escape, but they soon realized that the antlers were attached to the creature's head. According to the lore, the monster was known to eat members of the tribe if they weren't careful while on the water. Then, in 1889, Captain James C. Kerr of the steamboat U.S. Grant was traveling across the lake with over 100 passengers. Suddenly they saw a large whale-like object swimming beside the boat. One of the crew members fired a gun at the beast, and it was said to have dove under the water. Sightings continued with a frequency of around 2 per year, until 1993 when there were 13. In one such incident, two people 25 minutes apart from each other reported seeing the creature on the same day. On May 24th of that year, two creatures were spotted swimming together in Big Arm Bay, with many assuming it was an adult and young one. Even a retired biologist who worked for the Fish and Wildlife Department named Laney Hansel had been collecting reported sightings through the years. While he hasn't seen the beast himself, he does state that most witnesses are credible, and he did recover nets from the lake that had enormous holes in them. As a side note, before I even knew I was making this video, my daughter randomly brought over to our house a drink she had purchased, and it was Flathead Lake soda. Isn't it random how life works sometimes? This isn't sponsored in the least, but I recommend the sour cherry, black raspberry, and strawberry orange flavors. I wasn't a fan of the huckleberry. Moving to the land, we have a few intriguing dogman sightings. I know I normally keep these to the honorable mentions section, but I really like the encounters. The first report occurred in northeast Montana in 1993. Two men were traveling down a rural road on their way home in the evening. While driving, they suddenly noticed that their headlights had illuminated a large furry mass in the middle of the road. Not thinking much of it, they slowed down considerably and just assumed that this being was an animal that had died. Their main concern at that moment was how they were going to drag it off the road so they could continue their travels. While parked on the road, the pair argued with each other as to who was going to be the lucky person to get out and move the creature. It was during this time that the mass of black fur began to move. As they watched, it stood up on its hind legs, giving it a stature of over 7 feet tall. Its head was described as resembling a jackal or German shepherd with a long snout and pointy ears. In its hands, it was holding the carcass of a rabbit that it appeared to have been eating. The beast stared at the men with its eyes glowing from the headlights. After a moment, the creature threw the rabbit to the side and started walking towards the car. The driver quickly put the vehicle in reverse, made a fast U-turn, and drove away as quickly as possible. The next sighting happened on July of 2015 near the area of Wise River. The individual moved into a house that sat right next to the woods, and his closest neighbor was a mile away. From the very beginning, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him from the woods, but outside of weird noises that other animals could make, nothing really happened. That is, until 2 weeks after moving in, he was awoke by a thunder and lightning storm at 2 a.m. He left his bed to fill a glass with water from the sink in the kitchen. While looking out of the window, a lightning flash illuminated the tree line, and he was terrified to see a creature standing there. Even though the moment was quick, he said it was covered in fur, was standing on its back legs, had the head of a dog, and its torso was quite a bit larger than its lower half. Seconds later, another flash went off, and the creature was gone. A few weeks later, while watching TV, his satellite lost its signal. He mustered up the courage to go outside to adjust the dish, knowing it would only take him a second to do so. Even as such, he took his newly acquired gun and flashlight with him. While making the adjustment, he realized that the forest was incredibly quiet, which made him feel very uneasy. It was then that he heard the sound of a branch breaking, and he swung around with his flashlight. There amongst the trees he was met with what he described as blood-red eyes staring back at him, only 20 feet away. The head was said to appear like a mutated German shepherd, with a long muzzle and pointed ears. It was half crouched down, but was still around 6 feet tall. At first he backed away slowly, all the while keeping his eyes on the creature, but then fear took over and he ran as fast as he could back to his house. He states that he didn't know if he was being chased, since he didn't dare look back. In the safety of his house, he rested against the wall, holding onto his gun, preparing for a fight. Luckily, the creature didn't attack that night, and he states that he moved out of the property not long after. He states that while he did have his gun with him during the encounter, he was too in shock to even consider using it. He also said that he was so close to the creature that he could smell it, and it had the odor of a wet dog that had rolled in something nasty. Our final two cryptids have short encounters, but I feel they are important to note. The first one is known to roam the skies. I am not sure if it is a mothman, a gargoyle, or something else. In 2010, two friends were hanging out in a parking lot after work in the town of Hamilton. As the night drew on, the pair decided to leave the area to return home. As they were driving, they decided to turn on some music fairly loudly. Not long after this, from the corner of his eye, the driver caught the sight of what he thought was simply a brown bag rolling on the ground. As they neared, it quickly became evident that this object wasn't a bag, but was some type of winged creature. This being appeared to have crash-landed and was trying to recover. Moments later, it stood up on its hind feet, spread its 6 to 8 feet long fleshy webbed wings, and took off into the sky. The pair watched it fly for about 2 to 3 minutes before it vanished from sight. It was said to be human-like in size and was a brownish-gray color. The wings didn't have any feathers on it and simply looked like those of a bat. The driver assumed that the bass from the radio disoriented the creature and caused it to fall from the sky. This theory was due to how the creature seemed to fall just as soon as they turned on the music. The inclusion of this detail really led them to believe that this being was more akin to a bat. The final one is what can only be described as the recently talked about crawlers. 2 years ago, a man was hiking in the woods when he heard a weird screaming noise coming from deep within the trees. It is stated that the sound didn't resemble a mountain lion or a bear. The scream came in 10-second intervals and sounded distorted like a possessed human being. As he reached the top of the mountain, he used his binoculars to try to find the source of the sound. To his horror, he spied a white-colored humanoid-like being a short distance away. It was described as having skin the color of paper. It didn't have any hair or clothes, its arms were longer than its body, and it possessed 2 giant black eyes that took up a good portion of its head. At first the creature was walking around, but then it stopped and stared at the man. The incident lasted for 2 minutes, and he even stated that it felt like it was staring into his soul. He didn't want to take his eyes off the beast, but eventually had to blink. Within that moment, the creature vanished from sight. Deciding it was best to leave the area, he ran home, but when he was 5 minutes away, he heard the same scream, but this time, it sounded closer. Originally, the man thought he may have been having a hallucination, but he later found out that his dad had heard the screams, and even a neighbor had reported the same sounds. While I obviously feel this report needs to be taken with a giant grain of salt, it does sound very similar to the beings known as crawlers that do make their homes in caves and tunnels. As usual, I couldn't talk about every cryptid found in this state, but we always have our honorable mentions section. There are quite a few interesting Bigfoot encounters found here, including one that has red eyes. While I am not sure if they are the same as the previously mentioned Bigfoot, but there are quite a few reports of giants being seen, or their footprints being found, throughout history. There is said to be a small population, or should I say small pockets, of sightings of thunderbirds coming from the northernmost point of the state. Ashland has reports of a deer man, and they come from the northern Cheyenne reservations. It was seen in 2002, and was described as having a muscular man's body with the head of a deer. This state's most famous cryptid would be the Shunkawarrican. This giant wolf-like creature was said to have the sloped shoulders of a hyena. It was reported by various tribes in the early 1800s, and sightings have been noted as recent as 2013. I would have included it in the main list, but there is a huge debate if it is actually an unknown creature or simply a wolf hybrid. I saw an interesting report about people claiming to see a kangaroo jump in front of their car. Even the police who responded thought it was a joke until they saw the creature themselves. The creature was very real, but it was also known that a local farm actually raised the animals, and this one had escaped. So, I'm sorry to say there isn't a phantom kangaroo here. As I end this, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, I made Montana proud. I will admit that I was a little shocked and maybe a little disappointed that I couldn't find any reports of living dinosaurs or reptilian beings here. I figured that this landscape would be the perfect habitat for such creatures. Now, I am not saying that reports don't exist, but I couldn't find any mentionings of them. As always, remember to keep voting for which state you would like to see next in this series. Admittedly, our list has grown rather short, but we do still have some interesting locations to visit. This brings up an interesting quandary that maybe you can help with. While we all know this series is about the 50 states, would you want me to include the US territory of Puerto Rico, or just keep it as part of the Cryptid by region? If you want me to include it, then I will more than likely make it the last location we visit. No voting needed. Although this could be a slippery slope with the 7 other territories, so I don't know. Maybe Cryptid by region is the best place for them. Let me know your thoughts. Before I end this out, I do want to apologize for my voice. Apparently my sinuses have really kicked in while I was recording this. If you haven't yet done so, do please consider subscribing to my channel for more content like this. Also, it would be greatly appreciated if you could share my videos with someone you know who may enjoy this type of genre. With that, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Later!